All right, today we are diving deep into something that's basically the backbone of any stable, trustworthy company. We're talking about the COSO framework for internal control. Think of it as the blueprint for building trust, not from the outside in, but from the inside out.
So let me ask you something. What really stops a company from just imploding? We're always looking over our shoulder at competitors, at the market, but the truth is, the biggest, most spectacular failures, they almost always start from the inside. We're talking about breakdowns in how things are done, in ethics, in just basic oversight. And hey, this isn't some academic exercise. Remember the early 2000s? We got a brutal, real-world lesson with scandals like Enron and WorldCom. I mean, these weren't small mistakes. They were colossal failures of internal control. They literally wiped out companies, vaporized people's life savings, and just shattered public trust. The fallout was so huge that it led to the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, basically a giant, unblinking spotlight aimed squarely at the stuff we're talking about right now.
Okay, so here's our game plan. We'll kick things off with what internal control even is. Then we'll get into its three main goals and the five key parts that make it work. After that, we'll look at how this all plays out in the real world, why these systems sometimes break down, and we'll wrap up by connecting the dots between controls, company culture, and confidence.
All right, let's jump into part one. What is internal control, really? This is all about building that solid foundation for a stable company. Okay, I know this looks a bit textbooky, but hang with me, because the key words here are everything. First off, it's a process, meaning it's not a one-and-done thing, it's always moving. Second, it's affected by personnel. This is all about people. It's a human system. And maybe the most important part, reasonable assurance. Get this, no system is perfect. It can't guarantee against every single thing going wrong, and that's a really critical point to understand. So how do you actually build this thing? Well, the good news is you don't have to invent it from scratch. There's a globally accepted blueprint, and it's called the COSO Internal Control Integrated Framework. Now, COSO, that stands for the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of the Treadway Commission. Quite a mouthful. They put this model together, and it's pretty much become the gold standard everywhere. And here it is, the famous COSO cube. This visual is just brilliant because it shows you how all the pieces fit together. So look at the top. Those are the three objectives. That's the what a company is trying to do. Then on the front face, you've got the five components. That's the how, what you need to do to get there. And then on the side, you see the organizational structure. That's the where these controls are actually put into practice. Okay, let's start with that top face of the cube, the what. That brings us to our second section, the three core objectives. Basically, what does success even look like? COSO breaks down the goals into three big buckets. First up is operations. This is just about running the business well, being efficient, and making sure the company's assets are safe. The second bucket is reporting. This is all about trust, right? Making sure the information the company puts out there, financial or otherwise, is reliable and transparent. And finally, number three is compliance. Pretty straightforward, just following the rules, the laws, and the regulations. So we've covered the what, the objectives. Now it's time for the how, and this is really the heart of the whole framework. Let's get into section 3, the 5 key components. First up, we have the bedrock of the entire system, the control environment. So, what does this foundation actually look like? The official COSO definition you see here talks about standards, processes, and structures. But what does that really mean day to day? The easiest way to think about it is like the foundation of a skyscraper. It all boils down to what we call the tone at the top. This is all about leadership's commitment to doing the right thing, having an independent board that's actually watching, making sure everyone knows who's responsible for what, hiring good people, and, here's the kicker, actually holding people accountable. If this foundation has cracks, guess what? The whole building is at risk. All right, on to component number 2, risk assessment. This is where we stop waiting for things to go wrong and start looking for trouble proactively. The quote here uses the words dynamic and iterative, and that's exactly right. It means a company can't just do this once. You have to be constantly scanning the horizon for risks that could derail your plans, and that means everything from a new competitor popping up to the threat of fraud from within. Okay, so you found the risks. Now what? Well, you've got to do something about them. And that brings us to component 3, control activities. The definition here talks about actions established by policies and procedures. But here's the simple version. These are the actual on-the-ground rules and actions people take every single day. They're the nuts and bolts that are designed to tackle those risks we just talked about and, keep the train on the tracks. Next up, component 4, which is information and communication. You can think of this as the entire system's central nervous system.
I mean, it's pretty simple when you think about it. For any of this to work, the right information, good quality information, has to get to the right people at the right time. And it needs to flow up, down, and across the organization so everyone, and I mean everyone, knows what their responsibilities are and how they fit into the bigger picture.
And that brings us to our fifth and final component, the one that closes the loop: monitoring activities.
So, how do you make sure the whole system is actually working? That's where monitoring comes in. As the framework says, you use a mix of ongoing evaluations, like regular checks, and separate evaluations, think internal audits, to see if everything is in place.
And the whole point of this is to figure out if each of those 5 components we just talked about are not just present, like written down in a manual somewhere, but are they really functioning over time? It's the essential feedback loop that makes sure the system doesn't just exist, but actually works.
Okay, so that's all the theory. Now let's get practical. Section 4 is all about putting these controls into action.
When you look at most control activities, they tend to fall into one of 3 buckets. First, you've got preventive controls. Their job is to stop bad things from happening in the first place. A perfect example is separating duties. Then you have detective controls. These guys are there to find problems after the fact, like when you reconcile an account and find a discrepancy. And finally, you have corrective controls, which swoop in to fix whatever was found and make sure it doesn't happen again.
And this table lays it all out with some really clear, everyday examples. Take segregation of duties. You have one person who can approve a payment, a totally different person who actually makes the payment, and a third person who checks the books. By splitting up those tasks, you make it super hard for any one person to commit fraud and cover it up. Or how about authorizations? Making a manager sign off on any purchase over $1,000? That's a simple, powerful control to make sure someone is watching the big transactions. But, and this is a big but, like we said at the beginning, no system is perfect, nothing is foolproof, which brings us to a very important reality check in Section 5, why controls can fail. So here's the classic disconnect between theory and reality. On paper, the process is flawless, but we live in the real world, and any system run by humans is going to have vulnerabilities. You've got simple human error. I mean, people just make mistakes. Then you have management override, which is a fancy way of saying a boss uses their power to go around a rule. And the really tricky one, collusion. That's when 2 or more people work together to beat the system. And this is exactly why we talk about reasonable assurance, not absolute assurance. And all of this leads us to our final and maybe the most important section of all: controls, culture, and confidence. Because at the end of the day, this whole thing is less about policies on a page and more about people. So, how do you actually build a culture where controls aren't just tolerated, but actually respected? Well, it absolutely has to start with a strong tone at the top. Leadership has to walk the walk, showing everyone that doing the right thing isn't optional. Then you have to explain the why. If people understand that controls are there to protect them and the company, they won't see them as annoying hurdles. That's how you get buy-in. That's how you create a sense of we're all in this together, and that's why you need crystal clear accountability. And really, if you take one thing away from all of this, let it be this: effective controls aren't just some technical check-the-box exercise for the auditors. They are a cultural mindset. It's an attitude that has to be woven into the very fabric of the company. That's what builds resilience, that's what protects the business, and that's ultimately what earns you the trust and confidence of everyone involved. So to wrap this all up, I want to leave you with a question to think about, maybe in the context of your own workplace. Is your organization's success built on a really strong, deliberate foundation of control, or are you just getting lucky? Because the answer to that question, well, it can make all the difference in the world.